Baylor Director of Athletics, Mack Rhoades, with us. Paul Catalina, Craig, and David Smoak on 365 Sports. Mack, thank you very much for your time. This is not in any way to compare to where Baylor was and what you had to deal with, the dark clouds and controversy when you arrived in the summer of 2016. But has the football program's decline been pretty much next up as one of your toughest challenges right now as an AD?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think it depends upon how you look at it, right? And you think about it. It's certainly a tough stretch, a tough patch because, we're disappointed, after 4 games, right? We certainly didn't expect to be 1-3, and the Texas State loss was obviously a tough loss. When you think about both Utah and Texas, right? Those are 2 teams that are top 10. I didn't see the latest AP. I'm not sure exactly where Utah was, but certainly if they're not top 10, they're right there. And statistically, 2 of the most elite defenses. And you think about the 3 losses, those teams have a combined 11-1 record. Now, again, certainly inexcusable, and no disrespect to lose to Texas State. So, from that perspective, that's really tough. And so all of the the negativity, right, that surrounds all of that, having to navigate that, but I think, the positive for me is, I've walked into, some athletic departments as athletic directors, right, where the football program has been on a decline and headed in the wrong direction. And, those programs, the culture wasn't good. There was dysfunction within the walls. Players had given up on coaches. There was discontent, obviously, amongst players, finger pointing. There was disconnect with coaching staff, right? All of those things. And then when you looked at the roster, there wasn't a lot of necessarily, hope for the future. And I really think we're in a much better and different situation than any of those. You look at stuff like 60% of the snaps, this season have come from our first or second year players, right? I think about, the 2020 season. That was a tough season. And yet in 2021, we win the Big 12 championship in the Sugar Bowl with that same roster. And so, we've got, I think, a program that, although the first 4 games have been tough and difficult, I do think that there is a lot of positive about the program. So I don't know, I think, I would have probably just candidly answered the question, Smoak, and I apologize for taking so long to answer. I probably, as I'm thinking through this, probably would have said, yeah, absolutely. It's the second hardest stretch by far. If I thought it was we were in a situation where I thought we were spiraling, downward and there was no hope. But there's a lot of positivity about a lot of positive things about the football program that I know and understand that not everybody gets to see because they're not part of it on a day-to-day basis.
Mack, have you had to, because it's rapidly, you have to break kind of old habits of doing things when, you had to assess a program differently because you're trying to build 5 years out. Now, because people can reset rosters and do things quickly, do you have a bit of a different way of looking at where a coaching staff is, where a roster is, where a team is, maybe a little bit differently than, I don't see how we can get out of this in 4 years, other than, hey, there could be a quick reboot at the end of the season?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not throwing away this. We still have 8 games, and I think we have a quality roster. I think we've had some bad luck. No excuse for it, but we've had some injury, right, and some inexperience. This game, right, we could get as many as 7 players back that would have played a lot of snaps for us that haven't been able to. We'll see if we get Blake back, and so I still expect us to have a really good remainder of the year, and again. When you think about how the schedule's set up, and particularly, front end loaded with a Utah and a Texas. Now, there's not an easy game, that remains on our schedule. So, and then Paul, just things have changed and you evolve, and it's certainly different now with the roster and all of the conversation and the transfer portal, right, and how you can change a roster fairly quickly. You can't do what Colorado did. You can only do that as a first time coach coming in, but so you can't be that drastic, but you have opportunity to really help yourself in some different positions. So you're trying to navigate that all, and so you do think about it a little bit differently than maybe what you would have 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Mack, obviously a big crowd on hand last Saturday, the big send-off for Texas, a prime-time game, big-time opportunity, and the game, got out of hand pretty quickly. Texas is a top 3 team in the country, but that was the end of an era, and it seemed like that place was a buzz, at least at the beginning of that game. Just what were your thoughts on, the event itself and the send-off of this Texas-Baylor football rivalry?
Yeah, I was speaking to a group prior to the game, prior to the kickoff, and so I think first and foremost, it was a great atmosphere, great energy. Loved that our students came out in black. They were terrific. A lot of good stuff, right? But I think there's mixed emotions, about not playing Texas anymore. It's a game, that I think has meant something to our fans. I think it's a game that has meant something to their fans. That's what a rivalry is, right? Two institutions that don't necessarily like one another, respect one another, but don't like one another. And so, you're going to miss that. Now, when we think about the new Big 12 and certainly the 4 in this year and the 4 new coming in, right? We'll develop those rivalries, but this has been a long-standing rivalry, and when you've had some success, certainly when we think about just in recent years, it's probably not a rivalry that you want to see go away. Quite frankly, I think in the last 75 contests against Texas in football, men's and women's basketball, we've won 75% of those, and so we've been able to have some success, and that's probably another reason why, hey, you wish you were able to hang on to the rivalry. And again, I think it's been good for our fans, both sets of fans.
Mac, you mentioned there are things that you see that maybe most don't, maybe outside of the program. Can you share what some of those are? Because obviously the results say otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I think going back to the Texas game, and Craig, I think your exact words were it got out of hand pretty quickly. And I don't know that I disagree, right? I've heard now 2 stats, right? We were in the red zone 6 times. We were in the red zone 7 times. Regardless, right? We scored 6 points. That's unacceptable. We got to get better. And doesn't matter who's playing at quarterback. Doesn't matter how young, our offensive line is, right? All of that. Doesn't matter that the Texas defenders, when we beat them in 2021, they were freshmen and sophomores, and now they're juniors and seniors. We need to figure it out, and we need to be better and a lot more efficient than only 6 points in terms of the red zone. So the things that I see are culture and the connectivity of the team and the different conversations and the lack of finger pointing and this is a team that despite 1-3 and nobody happy with the way we played, starting with Dave Aranda and the staff, but also our players. Like it's a team that's still really close and still really supportive of one another and supporting each other as individuals and taking ownership of not performing at maybe a level or executing at a level that they should, right? Not blaming it on anybody else, but taking that ownership. And so, it's still a really, really healthy locker room. It's still a unit. And when I say unit, I'm talking about certainly, the 110 players, but also the coaching staff that is very much still on the same page. And I think, pulling the rope in the same direction. So those are all of the little things, the energy in the meetings, the energy out on the practice field, players still being on time for everything, right? All of those little things are still really, really, really positive. And, when you've been doing this long enough, teams that are heading south and there's not a lot of hope, right? None of those things are happening. There's pointing fingers. There's people blaming each other. There's people not pulling the rope in the same direction. All of a sudden, the little things like being on meetings, being to meetings on time, etc. All of that now is disregarded, and so the care factor really goes down. And I will just probably the best way for me to summarize it is that the overall care factor within the program is still really, really, really high.
Everyone wants to get rid of somebody. The loyalty that Dave Aranda showed Baylor after 12-2, the best year ever, the Big 12 title, the Sugar Bowl, and yet again he also got a very nice chunk with an extension that you all at Baylor offered and he accepted. But at the same time, it's what have you done for me lately? In your opinion, the word pressure may not be the right word, but I think it's a fair question. Do you think Dave feels more pressure, or do you because that's the one you hired?
Yeah. I'm kind of chuckling because Dave and I don't sit around Sunday night and say, "Hey, you feel more pressure," or
I know,
or do I feel more pressure? I think. Look, Dave's focused on how do we win games? How do we get better? How do we beat UCF on Saturday? Quite frankly, and so I think he's human, and he knows that 1-3 isn't where we should be, and and so he gets that there is some pressure and there is some noise. I don't think he's listening to the noise, but he's again, he's smart. He knows that there's a lot of chatter out there, but I think he's focused on the right things. And for me, again, I stay focused on what I can control, what we can control. And I would say the same for Dave. And so that's where my focus is. And like I said, I think this program is healthy, and I think that it's got a bright future. Certainly not throwing this season away. I think we have an opportunity to really, really compete. And I think I just saying, in closing on this particular question, I've got complete faith in Dave Aranda.
Mack, I had gotten several questions during our post-game show and then afterwards about NIL, and you've addressed it many times about the structure and what you guys expect to do in the future. But most of them I told, look, I can't speak informedly on how Baylor has it or anybody does, because everything's still kind of shrouded in some secrecy. Do you foresee an era, since it is within the rules for players to have name, image, and likeness, where we get some transparency on it and we don't treat it so cloak and dagger like it's still somehow against the rules?
Yeah, no, yes, I do foresee. I think, one of the reasons why I think, federal legislation is desperately needed is obviously, one, the preemption of state laws, right? And I think the number is it's 30 plus, it may be 33, but states that have their own name, image, and likeness rules, right? And so just a lot of different people doing it different ways, and some more advantageous than others. And so, needing that level playing field. So federal legislation can come in and preempt, right? But then the person, the piece that you've spoken to, Paul, is the transparency piece, right? Is for there to be great transparency and disclosure and really law and order of how we do that, right? Protection for our student athletes when we think about consumer protection and certification of agents and consistent contracts and then transparency of the different deals and this idea of establishing a fair market. So I do think that there'll be a time for that and hopefully sooner rather than later. What's been so confusing is that, initially an athletic department couldn't even really talk about it, certainly couldn't assist in helping, raise monies for name, image, and likeness. And so there was just a lot of questions by our constituents that we really couldn't answer or speak into, right? And now that has changed. So we've been able to speak into it more. I think you saw, for the first time, the video board and really promoting name, image, and likeness, and that it's important to Baylor. It's important to us if we're going to be relevant. I will tell you, in the name, image, and likeness space of football, men's and women's basketball, we're pretty healthy when we think about the Big 12. We're not at the top, but I would say we're in the upper half. So we're fighting, scratching, clawing in that space. But we'll see where this thing heads. When I was talking about it the other day, it feels like the COVID period of time where you couldn't make plans, with and be definitive, right? That you could make plans, but you also knew that you may have to pivot at a moment's notice, and that's what it feels like right now in terms of working in the name, image, and likeness space. Because if you asked anybody, what's this look like in 3 or 4 years, and they said, hey, I definitely know that it's going to be like this, I would say, yeah, wrong. There's none of us know what this is going to look like in 3 to 4 years. This
might be a better question for Dave Aranda, but you mentioned the locker room. It's not toxic. There's no finger pointing, and it's very close. But in your opinion, have you and Dave talked about this, why that has not translated when a game kicks off with that type of lock-in arms, hell-bent for election, we're here for each other? That doesn't seem to have carried over on the field.
Yeah, great question. And I really appreciate the question. As you can imagine, Dave and I have had a lot of conversations, and absolutely, that's certainly one of them. Because there is that togetherness, there is that care factor. Those kids run through a brick wall for Dave Aranda. That hasn't, I haven't seen that change at all. I think, transferring and translating that to the field on Saturday, because if you look at our practices, they're high energy, they're competitive, they're physical, all of those things. Why hasn't it necessarily translated to the field? Is it because we're playing so many newcomers? Is it because we've had some injuries? Again, all of those are excuses. And those might be, the right answers as to why, but we've got to overcome that. And we've got to figure out how we take, the work that's being put in, Sunday through Friday and make that show up on the field on Saturday.
Mack Rhoades, Baylor Director of Athletics, with us on 365 Sports. My last question for you, and it's non-football. I'm sure you're happy with that. The Pavilion has announced
we can talk as much football as you want.
No, okay. The Pavilion has announced their opening dates on January 2nd and 3rd for both men's and women's basketball. Just the fact that you have dates and that's when it opens, and just kind of that next step of when that opens up at the early part of the year.
Yeah, we were happy to announce that, right? Obviously, there's still when we're talking end of September, and we're projecting those dates and completion, 3 months, in advance. There's always a possibility that could change and something happens that we're certainly not anticipating in terms of the construction timeline. But at least right now and today, and we needed to release the schedule, we feel really positive, really good about it. So we're excited. There are some things that have to happen here in the next few days. We got to get the air conditioning on, right, in the building. Why does the air conditioning need to come on? Because we need to bring in the maple wood floor, and it needs to cure, right? And that can't be done unless it's a conditioned space. And so there's some of those things that we think that all things are positive, but not 100% sure, and that's why we said, hey, those are the second and third are targeted, and we feel really good about it, and we'll communicate if anything changes.
Mack, I want to go back in my last question. I promised you this. I said that, but you mentioned earlier that you have all the faith in the world in Dave Aranda. That's not that dreaded vote of confidence. That's not what you were doing. I didn't ask you for that, but that's where you are right now, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I'm at.
Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Baylor Director of Athletics, Mack Rhoades, with us, usually on Tuesdays.